I'm your host, Chris Valentin, and today I think I have the most interesting guest I've ever had on. This is Ross Johnson.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on. And you have the most interesting story, maybe one of the most interesting stories I've ever heard in my life. You grew up in a home where you have basically two moms.
Correct.
And your mom got artificial assimilation. Is that how you say it?
Artificially inseminated.
Yeah. And you were born, but you're like a test tube child.
That is correct.
You don't have a dad, never had a dad. And you grew up in a gay household.
Yeah.
With basically two moms. That's a crazy interesting story.
Yeah.
And then at 15 you got saved. So let's talk about that. Like, what was that like?
Well, I mean, it starts on day one, right? My mom, one day she decided I want to have a child. And since she was living a lesbian lifestyle, back in the day, she opened a phone book, looked in the phone book, found a lab, and walked into
I'm sorry. I don't know why it hit me funny. Just see. Okay, let's. It's not. It's kind of sad, but
I'm totally healed, so we're good.
I'm
gonna need inner healing after you.
Looked it up.
Take me to the Sozo building after. I need to go to the Sozo.
Hey, I want
building.
to have a child. I look up in the old pages.
Yeah.
Keep going. I'm sorry.
No, so my mom opens the phone book and she finds a lab. She walks in. She says, "Hey, I want to have a child." They give her a list of 10 different men. They give her characteristics, hair color, height, weight, age.
Seriously.
And she chooses one. And 9 months later, here I am. And so that's how I was born.
And how long was it before you realized, like, what age did you realize that, hey, other people have dads, I have two moms?
Yeah.
How old were you when you kind of realized, like, oh, most of the world doesn't live like this?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was just normal. So I didn't know anything different. But then when I would look at my friends' lives, I was like, well, they don't have two moms. They don't have two dads. But for some reason, I have two moms, right?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't this dialogue I had. It was just kind of like I accepted it. It was my normal life. It was my normal flow. But then obviously, as I began to get older, I was like, well, this isn't how everybody else lives. And thankfully, like you said, at 15, I got saved, which obviously absolutely transformed my whole life, my thought process, my mind, every part of who I was.
Was your mom going to church? Or, I mean, how did you encounter Jesus?
Yeah, a friend invited me to church. It was her and her grandma. They'd go every Sunday. And I don't know what got into them. I knew them for years. And then one week, they're like, Ross, you want to go to church? And I'm thinking, I got nothing to lose. And so I show up at the Sunday service. I'm sitting in the back row. I always say like this, I'm like, God will get you in the back row.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm sitting in the back row.
Yeah.
And for the first time in my life, I felt hope. I felt joy. I felt destiny. I felt like I had a purpose. And so I go home that night and I'm sitting there in my room and I'm like, if what that preacher said is real, keep in mind, I had never had a conversation with God. I had never had a dialogue with God.
Was your mom like anti-church or anti-religion or any, like, was there ever conversations about like those guys are like off limits?
Well, I was 15. So guess who had to drive me to church? My mom. So she would drive me to church, go back home, come pick me up, and then take me back. She didn't engage in it. She didn't talk about it. She didn't really want to have a conversation, but she loved me so much and supported me so much that she was willing to do that.
That's amazing. So to this day, at this point, as far as you know, your mom doesn't have a relationship with the Lord.
Correct.
And still lives the gay lifestyle with the basically same woman, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's crazy. So you get saved, you get radically saved.
Yeah.
And now you're reading the Bible and you're seeing like, oh, homosexuality is not just another lifestyle. It's actually forbidden in the Bible.
Yeah.
So how do you relate to that?
Well, let's actually backtrack a little bit. Before, like right when I first got saved, the best language I have for this, it's like I knew that all this was right. I knew what was wrong and what was right, but I just didn't have the language for it. So when I heard the gospel and then the Holy Spirit filled me, it wasn't like this dialogue or this competition, like, I got to choose this, I got to choose that. I'm like, no, this is the design of God. This is the will of God. This isn't. So for me, it was less of like a conversation and more so I kind of already knew. And I just needed the Holy Spirit to confirm that to me, which he did.
And have you ever had a conversation with your mom about like that?
Yeah. So my mom, when I have conversations about Jesus, it's a really interesting thing. She won't come to any gathering of mine because she knows she'll get saved, right? But outside of that, when I have conversations, about Jesus with my mom.
This is the funniest, I'm sorry. This interview is like so intriguing because you're just such a healthy person.
Yeah.
And grew up, in something that I would view as like one of the most unhealthy It is probably not from, I grew up in violence, so not that kind of unhealthy, but just the sexually unhealthy kind of situation. So so finish your story. Sorry to keep interrupting you.
Oh, no worries. I mean, when I have these conversations with my mom, it's like she's engaged because she loves me and she supports me, but you can tell there's like this barrier or there's a limit.
She's a good mom.
Yeah, she's a great mom. She's loved me to death. I've always made that so clear. I'm like, my mom would probably give her life for me, honestly. Yeah. Like, she loves me that much. She's one of my financial donors. She'll text me before I preach, go get him, son. I'm like, who is this? You know, who is this? It's my mom. She loves me that much.
Your mom's going to be a radical evangelist.
Exactly. I just asked her 2 weeks ago. I said, hey, mom, listen. So, because she's in her mid 60s. She had me when she was 35. I said, mom, you got probably 10, 15, 20 years left. Let's just be honest. And I said, why don't you just travel with me while I preach? She said, yes. So I'm like, we're going to see where this goes.
That's so awesome. Okay, so you're out right now. I mean, what you're doing, we found you on I think Instagram, and we're hearing you preach the gospel and telling your story, which is this is a very unique story. There's it's not even in the gay community. This is not the most this is not a common story even in the gay community. So how's the LGBTQ community relating to you? Like, they see you as an enemy, or they're like, oh, and I understand it's a broad stroke, right?
Totally.
It's made up of hundreds of thousands of people, so obviously people are going to relate differently. But are you getting a bunch of pushback from what you're doing and sharing?
Yeah, I definitely have received some pushback, but it's interesting because what they typically want to point to is, well, you hate your moms or you hate this community. I go, well, do you not understand that for 18 years of my life, I literally lived in a household with 2 lesbians, and every single one of their friends was a part of the LGBTQ community. So if you think that I hate that community, you're just wrong. It's just that simple. And what's really crazy is when I go home to be with my mom for her birthday or different occasions, she'll bring her friends, and all her friends in the LGBTQ community. Some of them know what I do. I remember I was sitting at the table and one of her friends said, so tell me what you do. She had no clue, right?
No.
She has no clue. And I go, oh, I just travel America and preach Jesus full time. And she looks at me and she's kind of shocked and taken aback, like, can you say that again? I'm like, yeah, I travel America and I share Jesus. Another friend said this. He said, listen, Ross, I listen to your clips. I'm a gay man, but if I wasn't an atheist, I'd definitely be a Christian. I was like, what does that mean? I don't fully know what that means, but I think it's good. I think it's good.
If I was an atheist, I'd be a Christian.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely received pushback, but I've also seen that when I built heart connection with people and they see me as a real person, not a preacher, not revivalist, evangelist Ross. No, when they see me as Ross, who's a man who simply loves Jesus and loves his parents and loves his family, they're willing to at least have a conversation, and they actually are willing to listen. And I'm just believing that the Holy Spirit's going to grip them.
Well, one thing that you have that I don't have is you have experience. Like, no one can tell you, well, this is what it's like.
Yeah.
Or no one can tell you, like, oh, well, having 2 moms or having 2 dads is healthy and normal, because you grew up in that home, right? So you're kind of like, for the Lord, you're kind of a secret weapon in the Lord for not going after people in a way of condemning them, but actually saying, I'm the fruit of what happens when you actually don't follow the Lord in this area.
Yeah.
And I have the repercussions, I have the side effects of a lifestyle gone awry.
Totally. Yeah. Because I remember growing up, right? I never had this dialogue about pain or trauma because I didn't even know it existed. But then when you get saved and the Holy Spirit starts talking to you, starts convicting you, starts revealing things to you, you go, oh my gosh, Ross, I have a deep father wound. I have an orphan spirit. Though everything in the externally is going well, internally I'm broken. Internally I'm empty. So I started to see these things when I gave my life to Jesus.
And have you met other women or men in your same situation? Like, do you know other people that have, two moms or 2 dads and have this going on?
I've had a few people reach out to me on social media. Okay. I've never met anybody in person, but out of those few people that reached out to me, at least 2 of them have the similar story of mine, and they're now Christians. And so when they reached out to me, they're like, how do you engage your family? How do you share the gospel with them? So obviously, it's probably becoming a little bit more prevalent, especially as we see, for a lack of a better term, the rise of the LGBTQ community. And we're starting to see this openness, or more people. What is it? 1 in 4 Gen Zs is saying that they are a part of the LGBTQ community. It's a crazy number. It's a crazy stat. Number, So it's definitely probably going to be a story that we'll see more of, but it also gives me hope. When I don't have hope, sometimes I just have to remind myself of my own story and say, God, if you did it with me, you can do it with them.